Welcome to the DevReady podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today we have Adam Jacoby joining us. He's a founder of MiVote, also Director of Global and Strategic Innovation at Swinburne University, and teaching us a little bit today about his experiences in starting up tech products being a non-tech. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you coming out. So Adam and I connected on LinkedIn through just a couple of people that I know and reached out, and he was happy to join us and share his story, predominantly around MiVote and the technology that they built there. We'll explore that a little bit today. In terms of your story, Adam, how did it all start? How did your career start? Where did you begin?
I guess it started with immense failure, really. So, did really terribly at high school, and fairly quickly worked out that the pathway that was expected of me from my parents and family, and the school community that I was a part of, and looking at all my best friends, I wasn't going to become a doctor or a lawyer. So it was clear that something else had to happen. And I really genuinely, luckily, fell into a startup opportunity at a very young age, at 17, 18.
Okay.
And so started my first business, which was an athlete representation firm. So we were one of the first extreme sports athlete management agencies in the world. So skateboard, snowboard. So this was pre-X Games, pre-Fuel Television Network, any of that stuff. In fact, pre-Tony Hawk skateboarder game. So we were super early, and that was really just about being the right place at the right time. So when we started that business, the market was about $12.5 million, and when we sold out of that business, it was $13 billion.
Yes, a massive growth.
And so we rode a massive wave, and one of the great things about being so young and having a global business. So we started that business in Melbourne, sold it to a public company in London inside 2 years. Wow. I then moved to the US. So part of the sale agreement was that I had to remain the CEO for 5 years and moved to the US. And part of that experience was really a license at that young age to make a lot of mistakes, but nevertheless have a lot of exposure to business deals and business opportunities and seasoned executives that you wouldn't normally
get access to,
and not at that age anyway. So it was kind of like a lifetime PhD or MBA, but in practical, real sense. And that then kicked off about 23, 24 years of startup businesses around the world. And then, got to a point where I couldn't stomach the idea of startup number 9, and I said to my wife, I'm gonna take some time off. And I wanted to start thinking about the world that my kids grow up in, and specifically I was thinking about democracy and politics and their view and their say, and then there was kind of a pivot for the last 6 or 7 years into the not-for-profit sort of social innovation space. And at the time, my wife said to me, we'll take 6 months off and then, for God's sake, go back to work because you'd drive me crazy if you're in the house. But
so what brought that on?
That took years. That ended up being years and years.
Was that just bringing children into the world that brought that on, that choice?
Oh, no, I think it was sort of a confluence of different events. So certainly having the kids was a huge part of it. I've always been interested in politics and power, and how people who have power wield that power, and the equity of social decision making, and so I just. Again, I guess with an entrepreneurial hat, I wanted to reimagine what democracy could be if you were creating it as a startup company. Now, even though it was a not-for-profit, if you were going to rebuild democracy as a product that sat on a shelf, what would it need to do? How would it need to behave? Why would customers want to use it? Why would they tell their friends about it? And so part of that exploration was actually going back to sort of an ecosystem design approach, the first principles approach. What is democracy meant to do? Does it actually do that? If not, why not? And so that journey ended up being several years, which wasn't anticipated, but was really worthwhile. And then in understanding not just democracy here, because I guess initially the exploration started with Australia, because I'm interested in where my kids are growing up. Right? But then I started looking at, well, how does that compare to democracy in the US, and how does it compare in Greece, and how does it compare to India? And so as you start making those explorations, what you see is that there are a whole variety of erosions into systems that are not unique to Australia. In fact, that they are problems of the way democracy has been designed in general.
Okay.
And that wherever you look, it doesn't get delivered the way it was intended to deliver it.
How was it intended to be delivered?
Well, so democracy is about the enactment of the will of the people. And so there is no place in the world where the people's will is actually being enacted. And even if you make the argument that it should enact the will of the people, there are then, fairly significant challenges to ensure that you eradicate some of the problems that can emerge from that. So if you have the will of the people, but the people aren't informed with fact, then actually that's more dangerous. That's populism, right?
Yeah.
Or if you have the will of the people and they're informed, but elected representatives aren't held to account to listen to them, well, then what's the point of asking them in the first place? And so what you learn as you go through it, it's an ecosystem challenge, and by making one intervention won't fix the whole thing.
The whole thing.
And so what you realise is, over time, for us, we realised that there were about a dozen interventions that had to be made simultaneously. And so we then redesigned what that system would look like. And then, secondary to the design of how it should work, a techie approached us. In fact, somebody you've had on your show, Jamie Skeller, was sitting in the audience one day of a speech that I was giving somewhere or other. I think it might have been in South Melbourne.
Okay, so not too far from here.
And he said, I can build that. I can actually make that happen. So everything you're talking about can be aided by technology. And we can put a technological lens over it. And at the time, he was talking about blockchain and crypto, and I didn't understand what any of those things were at the time. But now, for better or worse, I have a pretty good comprehension of all of it. But yeah, and together, Jamie and then the MiVote movement ended up building the world's first ever functional blockchain voting platform. And
it's quite
kind
a
of it all
powerful
started
thing,
from there. So
and to take you a few steps back on that. So throughout your journey, you've obviously started up a number of different companies. Have there any been tech related pre-MiVote, or was that the first venture into some more technical stuff?
So when you say tech, I mean, there was tech involved in everything.
Yes.
But if they were driven by technology, I mean, I don't think anything I do is really driven by technology.
Yeah, I understand.
But technology becomes an enabler for everything that needs to be done.
And it's a huge point that you make there, because in reality, anyone that's out there starting a concept, an idea, it really is just an enabler. And I think people get lost in the technology and being, this is what it's all about, and this is the reason why we're building this, and this is going to change everything. But in essence, we're just trying to deliver a different form or a different means of delivering a different outcome. And that's what technology can do for us.
That's exactly right. And in that approach, if I look at the ecosystem in which we've built products, this kind of governance, government, DemTech, GovTech kind of space, to me, the products that miss the mark the most are ones that are being built by techies for techies without a context of the environment in which they're trying to fit. So we were having a conversation earlier about market fit, right?
Yeah.
So we did all the work on understanding what the market needed before we built the product. Whereas a lot of techies will say, I can build X, therefore I will build it, and then we'll figure out which market we should put it in.
And I've been there, done that, and it doesn't work out very well.
No, it never works, right? It can't work because, or if it works by accident. And so a big part of what I do at the university is I sit in the innovation entrepreneurial space. I oversee the content for the accelerator program and the pre-accelerator program and stuff. So I deal with startups all day, every day. And more often than not, what you find is where startups are missing the mark, the distinction between great startups and ordinary startups. The great ones can articulate very quickly the problem that they're trying to solve, how they know, so how they have validated that their solution is a solution that the market might be interested in. Rather than just saying, well, we're really good at facial recognition, and so we're building facial recognition. But actually saying, this is how it's going to be used. We've identified in this particular market, this is how it strengthens the proposition or adds value. And they've done all of that pre-work to ascertain what the genuine addressable market size is, as opposed to the universe of markets. Often we'll see startups, I'll see people who say, they might be in the soccer space. We had a soccer space not too long ago, and you say, what's your market? Well, there are 3 billion people who play soccer. Yeah, but that's not your market because you're only in Australia and you're only doing it online, and right now you can only do it on Apple. So your market has gone from 3 billion to about 100,000. And of those 100,000, there are only so many that can afford $100 a month, and so now you're down to about 3,000. And so just the ability to understand where it fits, what it is, whether it's financially viable, that's where there's a lot of gaps in that space.
And I think you touched on it really. It's really the tech jumps into a product and builds it, and it's just, and you might mention there like an AI product, but you're not really solving any problem. You're just trying to slap a product into any market, and that's really dangerous. I think if you want a niche, you want to understand who your product market fit or who your product for, what your customers look like. Do they want to buy this thing?
Yep.
Do they perceive value in this? And it's a very different conversation to let's just build some technology. Now, MiVote. So you were obviously pulling this together. It was something that you thought of for a little while, and then you met Jamie. So
Yep.
how did you go from concept to then starting to deliver some technology that might frame what you're trying to achieve there?
Yeah, it was a really interesting time because there were a variety of verticals that were being built at the same time, none of which we really understood. So we had a sense of what the political intervention was and the structural intervention was to the political system, but we didn't know if anybody was interested in that conversation or if it was just us government geeks, policy geeks.
Yep.
We didn't know if the technology would work and would be widely accepted because blockchain was still so new.
Yes.
And there were, like all new tech, people are skeptical and early adopters don't really get the cut through in the volume that you really want. And so particularly with like genuine breakthroughs like blockchain and crypto and AI, people are nervous before they're comfortable.
And they're nervous and you're pushing it into government, which is even nervous again, just by definition. So it's very interesting.
And so we were building, part of it was we were trying to build the narrative and comms and get validation there. Part of it was building brand and we were trying to get validation there. Then we were trying to have the policy structural ecosystem conversation and, and we'd done a lot of work with politicians and business leaders and religious leaders, community leaders around the world in actually sitting with them, explaining what the process was and the intervention was, to have them go, oh, that doesn't quite work and you haven't gone far enough here or you've gone too far there. Or,
so
we did a lot of that
to
have them go, oh, yes, this would work or it wouldn't. And then we got to a point where a few former heads of state, presidents, prime ministers had sort of said, shit, this could actually work. This is quite interesting. It doesn't mean it will work, but it could work. You've kind of thought through these things. And then we had the Jamie's piece. And the Jamie's piece was, for anybody who knows Jamie, he's kind of a no-nonsense guy. So he kind of came in and he said, well, I'll just build it, which is Jamie's way. So there's no mucking around. So, and he said, have you considered doing this on blockchain? And I said, what's blockchain? And he explained it to me. And he said, this is the advantages of doing it the way that you're intending to do it, and all these things that you weren't quite sure how to do, blockchain is going to solve for. And then he said, I'll just go and do it. And at the same time, we were also, because we were getting a bit of press and for some reason, it was becoming, the intervention of tech into government, whilst it had, it had been in the taxi space, it had been in the travel space, it had made a number of industry interventions. All of a sudden, there wasn't a lot in the gov tech, dem tech space. And so we got quite a bit of media for quite a period of time. And as a result of that, some people came out of the woodwork and sort of said, hey, that's interesting, I'm prepared to give you some money for that, like philanthropists. And so one philanthropist in particular came to us and gave us a chunk of money right off the bat. In fact, I didn't know him, but he saw the original, I guess I'd call it a positioning statement. Some people in the movement used to call it the manifesto, but I hate that. And look, he read that document and he sent me an email and he said, look, you don't know me, but I know somebody that you know, and I've read this thing that you put together about MiVote and what you're building. I've got 8 grandkids. I'm going to send you $5,000 for each one of those grandkids. There's 40 grand coming in the mail. That's the world I want them to grow up in.
Beautiful.
And so that was the beginning, and we took that 40 and we gave it the vast majority of it to Jamie, and he then built the first model. That particular donor ended up giving us probably close to 2 million over a number of years.
Oh, wow.
But that really kicked off the movement. It meant we could go, we could hire staff. It meant we could be in multiple locations at once. It meant we could build a brand. We could build legal protection, all those sorts of things. He gave us an office, a giant warehouse in Collingwood. So that, and then Jamie built this tech platform. We then put it into beta test in the market. So we didn't promote it much. We didn't do a lot of anything other than sort of saying to the Facebook, Twitter community who are interested in politics, hey, here's a different way of looking at the way we can make decisions as a community. We ran the first vote. I think we only had about 400 or 500 people who voted, and then and then by the 6th or 7th, we were in 4,000 or 5,000 person territory.
Okay.
Which, if you
So
look
big
at
growth
if
there.
you look at the poll, like political polling, those numbers are 2-3 times bigger than a news poll or a Guardian poll, or so you start to get some meat on the bone there.
So in terms of your first version of technology, this was built for MiVote at that time, and that was on the blockchain, was it? And
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So it was all on Ethereum blockchain technology. Yep. So if anyone doesn't know much about crypto space, I'm sure everyone's heard it in the news. So you were really early in that. What year were we looking at here?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I would say that was about 2006, 2007.
That early?
Yeah.
Okay.
We were
wow.
super early.
Yeah, that's very early. Okay, so you were that early into the piece that you were pushing out blockchain. Even
No, sorry. The movement would have started 2006, 2007.
Okay.
We probably put the product in market 2014, 15.
Okay, so it
was the tech in the market.
Yeah, okay. So it was still pre the blow up in terms of blockchain, clearly. So Ethereum was what you built it on, from what I know.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the Ethereum era, but very early the cost of Ethereum would have been cents.
Yep.
From what I imagine at that time, from what I'm thinking back. So yeah, this was that early that probably government didn't know what you were talking about at that time.
Yes, that's true. But the conversations we were having with government were not about the technology anyway. They were actually about the way that you go to people, the community, and have them make decisions.
Get it.
And then we were just saying, look, the way we do that is through technology.
Yes.
But they didn't understand blockchain. That wasn't the conversation.
Okay, so you kept that out of the conversation. What was the positioning statement for the business? Like, what were you trying to solve? Were you trying to solve voting for politics, or just more?
No, we were trying to solve for real democracy. So what we were saying is, we don't have real democracy. This is what real democracy means and what it should look like. And here is a method that we can collectively use, which will give us a greater chance of actually having real democracy. Try it out for yourself, effectively.
Yes.
It'll take you 15 minutes maximum, and you'll be able to have a say on something that somebody will be held accountable to.
Get it.
See what it's like to actually have choices that are not based upon, blue or red or green, left and right. See what it's like to have facts provided to you so you can make those choices, and then cast a vote and do it really quickly and easily on your phone, and that's the way you vote, and that's the way your voice gets heard, as opposed to going to vote every 3 years and standing in a queue and getting a democracy sausage, and that's how it works, right? Because people confuse democracy for elections. They're completely different things. And so what we were trying to do is bring the democratic experience to life more, and do it in a way that we could go back to the politicians and say, look at the kind of uptake we have, and look at the interest in policy conversations, and look at the richness of conversation as opposed to your binary, you say this so I have to say that, and look at the way that you can actually give people information so that they're better informed. And it's fair to say that around the world there are heads of state and political parties and governments who really embrace that, and there are those who are really fearful of it.
Yeah, because then they've got direct accountability. In reality, we're looking at putting an app in the hands of our community and then voting on every little bit and piece. I'd imagine that's where your vision was, so you can actually have a say.
It's not quite like that. So it's not every little bit and piece, but it is sort of the major pieces. The way that MiVote works is we talk about sort of destinational questions as opposed to we don't ever put up legislation. So if you look at a lot of the other technology in the space, they've decided to digitise the existing conversation, which is, do you support the bill or do you not support the bill, right? The problem with that is if you're working on a 50% plus one majority and you're talking about legislation, the vast majority of people don't have time or any interest in reading a 1,000-page piece of legislation.
And to build the context around that, to actually put a vote in.
And there's so much complexity in those documents. So what we do is we talk about destination. So I'll give you an example. So the last vote that we ran was an energy vote, timely kind of given climate change and everything. And if you look at what the government and what the opposition in Australia had been talking about for a couple of years, both of them had just been talking about the price to consumers. So how much our energy cost us. And it was like a Coles ad, right? Everybody's talking about the prices down. We're going to bring the prices down. We went to the community and we said, surely the conversation is more nuanced than that. So the question that we ask, and we always ask broad questions, they're curated in a very particular way. They have to go through an ethics and a governance committee, and there's a whole thing that I won't get into here. But the question that we asked was, when it comes to energy policy, do you want your government to prioritise A, price to the consumer, B, base load energy for the economy? So that would, if that was the majority position, then that would introduce the nuclear conversation as an example.
Get it.
C, would you like them to prioritise international obligations, so Kyoto, Paris, etc., or would you like them to prioritise carbon emissions reduction?
So it's more directional. Now I get that.
Yeah, it's
Makes
a
sense.
general direction. And then the policy gets built around the majority direction. So, with that particular vote, we expected, when we put the vote out, that overwhelmingly people would say price to the consumer.
Yes.
So only 24% of people said price to the consumer.
That's not what I would have expected at all.
Every vote we ever ran surprised us.
Yeah.
Every single one.
Interesting.
So it was 24% price to the consumer, 11% base load energy to the economy, 84% international obligations, 88% carbon emissions reduction as a priority. And the way that we can get those percentages, because people are now going, that doesn't make any fucking sense, right? The way that we do it, and the reason that MiVote is unique, and some would say kind of special in its modelling, is that we always offer 4 choices. They're always destinational, non-binary choices. We let people vote for as many or as few as they think they can live with, would be good for the country.
Okay.
And then we look for real consensus. So we don't have a policy position, a mandated position that any elected official needs to be held accountable to, unless we have a minimum of 60%.
All right.
Right? And when we started this, so many, many years ago, every political professor in the world was saying to us, even with technology, you're never going to get 60% majority on any of these issues. Yeah. It's not possible. We ran 7 votes. We've never had less than 60%, not once. Because people are able, when you're not saying this is the Labor position and this is the Liberal position, you just go, what do you think is good for the country? People have a different sense. And when they're able to, and we also, part of our model is that with all 4 of those choices, you get information packs. So we've never had less than 150 research reports, which are peer-reviewed factual reports, free for anybody to use. Okay. Now, most people, only about 2% of people go into those reports and want to do that real deep dive.
I'd imagine there's not going to be many jumping into 150 reports.
But there is a small information pack that takes about 6 minutes to go through, which is just the dot points for each one of those 4 choices.
It's a good summary.
And if you don't open the info pack for all 4, your voting light never goes on. So we say, if you choose not to inform yourself, we choose not to listen to you.
Understand.
Because that's your responsibility in a democracy. We give you the opportunity to have a say on everything, which is your democratic right, but you have to know what you're talking about before you make that choice, because it affects everybody.
Get it. Yeah, not just throwing darts at a dartboard saying, I think this is right.
Or I'm voting for them because that's the party that I like, or because my parents voted for them. Actually understanding the issue and going, no, I don't like that. I don't think that's a good idea. Or for instance, you can have more than one idea. So, for example, with asylum seekers, you could vote for one that says, well, I want border protection, but I also want to treat asylum seekers humanely. Right now, our political system doesn't allow us to have those choices. You're taking one or the other. But you're going, actually, both of these things are really important to me, that we protect our borders and we're good to people, and people shouldn't be punished for fleeing a terrible place in the world.
Correct.
And so we're looking for that nuance.
There's a balance there that we're trying to find, but we don't have a balance as one or the other.
Yeah, and what it does is it takes that ideological pressure out of the conversation, and that is not possible without technology. So it's one of these things where technology is the enabler, but without it, there is no way you could run the MiVote system. It just couldn't work. Get
it. So obviously Jamie was very pivotal to building that platform. So talk about your team. How did you structure your team for MiVote? Obviously there was yourself involved. You knew that some technology might be needed to deliver this. How did you go about finding the right people to build that team?
Yeah, so look, early on, like a lot of not-for-profit organisations, and we're a not-for-profit, so we were never about making $1. Everything we did was, so it was free to join, it was free to use, it was free to get the information, it was free to vote. There was no cost on anybody, right? Okay. So now that was both by design, but also became a real challenge for the organisation, because we also then went a step further in looking for democratic purity and said, well, we also can't take corporate money of any kind. And so we were offered a ton of money, like tens of millions of dollars from technology companies overseas who said, we'll build it for you, we'll give you the platform, we'll pay to be involved, but we want to co-own it or we want to own it. And once you give democracy to a corporation, it's no longer democracy, right?
Correct.
So we had to say no to those things, and then we baked into our organizational constitution that we couldn't take that. So that became a challenge. So in the early days, everybody that we worked with were volunteers, and we had to make do with what we had. Now, as it turns out, we were super fortunate. The people who were volunteering early were incredibly capable people. We had great Marcoms people, great activists, great writers, terrific researchers. And so what we tried to do was understand all of the vertical pillars that needed to be built. So we had a community development pillar, we had a technology pillar, we had a Marcoms pillar, we had a governance and leadership pillar, we had a government relations pillar, and we tried to assign volunteers that best fit. When it came to technology, though, it was slightly different. So we really lent on Jamie in particular in the first instance, but then as that team grew out, a group of people who had the required expertise. We went out and hired he oversaw effectively a tech firm that built the first iteration for us. So he built the scoping document. We did a number of interviews about this is what we need it to do, and this is how the product needs to behave, and this is what the immediate MVP needs to be, and eventually we'd like to grow out into these areas.
So let's take a couple of steps back there. So you had Jamie pulling this all together from the top level, saying how do we build and deliver an MVP, pulling apart all the important bits of information and building a strategy behind your technology.
And then overseeing the company who was actually doing the coding.
Get it.
And making sure that they were on track and making sure that it was meeting our requirements.
Understand.
And the first version of the product did that. So the MVP that was originally launched did exactly what we needed it to do. It didn't have any bugs. It worked the way it was meant to work. Subsequent versions, that wasn't the case. And in fact, the Horizon nightmare was a whole different story. But that first version, those first beta tests, were really well built and did exactly what we needed. The challenge there was that as crypto was becoming and blockchain was becoming more regular and prices were starting to go up, what we were learning is that it was actually a counterintuitive process in that it was going to cost, the more successful we became in terms of users, the more financially challenging it was going to be to run.
Yeah, I understand that.
And so that was kind of a learning curve as we were going.
If no one understands the crypto market, and as it blew up, the cost of Ethereum expanded and grew, that meant the cost of you actually running a process on Ethereum also grew. So it was cheap to begin with, as it got to $200-300 per coin, it became quite expensive pretty quickly. Yeah. So what was so during that time of uncertainty in terms of costs, how did you approach that?
Well, so at that point, we did the beta test. We satisfied ourselves that it worked, and then we hit. So we had this enormous peak at the time of international interest and uptake. And so at that point, we had about 35 countries around the world who were wanting to start MiVote chapters.
Yes.
Which we never anticipated that would happen. And we were standing on platforms and giving speeches. Spoke at World Economic Forum. We spoke at March for Our Lives with Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg. We were on stages we never imagined we'd be as well. And so this whole thing just kind of exploded in 24, 36 months.
Yes.
And we were meeting heads of state and governments and people.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there was some first mover advantage component to it. So we had been in the space longer than others.
Yes.
We were also the first people to actually build what everybody was talking about. So there were a ton of other digital democracy movements who were talking about how blockchain could do it, but hadn't actually built anything yet. I think the other thing is that our model is a holistic approach, whereas others were sort of targeted pinpoint interventions. And for governments, that the one thing they did realise is that that targeted pinpoint piece would only, as a government investment, would only take them so far. But the holistic approach is the thing that could actually make the difference and solve the problem, or at least go a way of solving the problem. And so as all of that was happening, and in fact, specifically, it was really post World Economic Forum, we were approached by a number of corporations who were saying, listen, great product, we couldn't care less about politics, but the fact that you can do anonymous voting
Yes.
on multiple areas is really interesting for us as a business. We'd like to use it as a consumer marketing polling piece, or we'd like, we had a very large accounting firm around the world come to us out of Spain and say we want to use it for all of our multinational corporations to do shareholder votes. And so all of a sudden they're saying, we want to license the product from you but not use it for politics. So as a board, we had to sit back and go, well, fuck, we can't take the money because we're constitutionally not allowed to take corporate money. What are we going to do? So we then came together and said, right, what we're going to do is decouple the technology and spin it out effectively.
Okay, and that was the born of Horizon State?
This was how Horizon State was created.
Understand.
So this was, from an integrity and values perspective, the best decision we ever made.
Yes.
And from a commercial perspective, the worst decision I've ever made in 25 plus years of business.
Okay.
So
we'll get into that.
So I really clearly remember that board meeting. It was a very, very long board meeting, for hours and hours that day. And we made a series of very calculated decisions. So the first decision was that we were going to spin the technology out, because to not spin the technology out meant that we had to become a technology company, which we didn't want to be. We were a political activist movement, right?
Understand.
So that was decision one. We had to spin it out. The other thing was, one of the things, as this was coming to a head with the corporate interest, we also had recognised that for a long time we were saying that political parties were the problem, and yet we were kind of aspiring to be a political party, which there was no integrity in that.
Yeah. Okay.
So we had made a decision at that same board meeting. In fact, it was the first decision of that board meeting, that we would never become a political party. And what that resulted in was that we would support independent candidates around the world, but we wouldn't support parties. So if we're going to support independent candidates, then the nature of the technological platform needs to be different, because it's not just a voting mechanism, but for an independent candidate, it's how do you raise money and how do you communicate, and how do you build communities online.
Why was that decision made that you wouldn't support parties but independents?
So it goes back to the heart of the democratic question, and ultimately parties are driven by ideology. And what ideology does, independent of whether you tend to subscribe to their view of the world or not, so whether you're left-leaning or right-leaning, that those parties that best align with those views or that those leanings take an ideological approach to every issue. And what it means is that ideology ordinarily supersedes facts and data. And if you are not taking a solutions-oriented approach to the problems, and climate change is a great example, coronavirus is another great example. If you are not listening to the science and you are taking an ideological lens, actually you are A, being undemocratic, B, doing the community a disservice. So we're saying you can't actually be a representative group as part of a party if you're underpinned by a particular worldview.
Interesting.
We want you to be led by facts and data on an issue-by-issue basis that says sometimes our answers and the best policy might look a little bit right, sometimes it might look a little bit left, but actually that doesn't matter, because if it's the best data available and it solves the problem that we're trying to solve and the majority of people want it, that's the best version of democracy.
And it clearly is, right? So given that, you've decided to support
spin it out.
Independence, so spinning out product, not technology. That could then serve some corporates too, potentially.
Yes, so the intent then was very clear. So so Jamie at that point was still on the board. He was the chief technologist on the board. It was decided that we would spin it out. Jamie and a couple of others would become the founders of that technology business. And so a couple of rules were created. The first rule was that nobody from MiVote could sit on Horizon State's board, and nobody from Horizon State could sit on MiVote's board. They had to be completely separate. In addition, we couldn't be involved in them raising money. We couldn't be involved in any of their decision making.
Interesting.
But, and this is where it got interesting, and I think the model that we created was really strong. The operationalizing that model was really poor in hindsight. So the first rule was we would give them all of the IP that had been created in MiVote for free, or no upfront charge. So Jamie took what he built, we put it into Horizon State, we helped handpick the other two founders, so the three co-founders.
How did you pick the founders?
So out of the tech, we were looking for very specific things: tech community, growth, startup land, global experience,
Yes.
ideally people who had worked with government clients or very senior sector clients,
Okay.
and had built enterprise level product. So that's
Yeah.
kind of what we were looking for. And so between the three that we had, we thought the three of them covered all the key areas that we required. We then made a decision, so we would give them the IP, they would use that IP to build their business. We wouldn't take any ownership of that business.
Because you couldn't?
Because we couldn't. However, what we were going to do were a few key things. So we were going to make them create a foundation so that they could donate a percentage of their revenues to us as a donation quarterly. And so their growth meant we could keep funding the not-for-profit movement.
Okay, makes sense.
And then there was an industry carve-out. So they could go and make money anywhere they wanted using the technology, any sector, but if it was government or NGO, it had to come through us.
Okay.
That was the rule. So that was the delineation. And notionally, that made a lot of strategic sense for everybody.
It does.
And should have operationalised really well.
Okay,
The problem was that there were people who were running that business who, it appears in hindsight, didn't really believe in any of the values that we set the business up for.
Okay.
And made decisions that were counter to the benefit of the not-for-profit organisation, which was the reason that business was set up in the first place.
Existed anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was massively disappointing for us, but it was a good lesson learned.
And given that you're not on the board and had no say,
we had no control. We couldn't do anything about it. So for example, there were little things like one of the critical things in the way that we set them up was that MiVote had to we were effectively a foundational client, which meant that they could build whatever they wanted, but they had to build for us first.
Okay.
Well, that never happened. Not like they never delivered a single product to us.
Oh.
So we had built our own product, and then even the product that we gave them, they still wouldn't give back to us. So we missed as a result of that. I missed, we had done a deal with the March for Our Lives people and a couple of gun groups in the US to run a gun vote in America.
Yep.
I publicly announced it on stage in front of thousands of people.
That's a huge
major rally. Never delivered the product. We announced in newspaper in Des Moines, Iowa, that we were going to run a water vote.
I heard all this news coming out because I was actually following.
No product. So, and we got to a point where that we'd been let down a few times. And I then got nervous because it was also my reputation. I mean, I'm the one out there doing these interviews and I'm the one on stage. And particularly with the gun vote, because it was a big audience. It was probably, other than World Economic Forum, the biggest platform we'd have to be on stage with Emma Gonzalez and all these people. Yes. And I remember calling the day before, and I called one of the people in the organisation, and I said, I'm getting on stage tomorrow, and I'm announcing that we're running a vote on this month, in October. I need an assurance that this bloody thing is going to be ready, because I'm not going to say it if you can't guarantee me now. And I was categorically told it will be ready. It's nearly done. We're just testing, and this was in August.
Okay.
And so I made the announcement. Sailed past the due date. Still no product. But product was getting released for German soccer clubs, and product was being released for other paying customers and for a political party in New Zealand, but still nothing for us because we weren't paying anything.
So what? Because you weren't paying anything?
Yeah, because we were a foundational client who didn't have to pay.
God.
So look, these were lessons, right?
Yeah.
So again, they built good product. They built product that worked. So again, in some ways, it was a validation that what we wanted to build was buildable.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing.
Clearly, if they're solving problems for other people,
and what we were able to validate on the non-technology side was that the product was in demand. So, in many regards, these were very positive messages. What we weren't able to do was control the technology company that would have enabled us to deliver on our promises.
Interesting.
And so we then got to a point where there was some rearrangement of people there. And the last CEO and I I'd sort of publicly had said, we're not working with them anymore. We're going to find alternatives.
Okay.
And the final CEO reached out to me from New Zealand and said, no, we were created because of you guys.
Yeah.
We want to build a relationship back again. And we had a series of great conversations. And we had started to kind of signpost and peg where we were going to go. And then circumstances that were outside of our control but were happening to them independently made them choose to shut up shop, which honestly came as much as a surprise to us as anybody else. And again, it was sort of, we thought we were finally back on the road to getting things the way they needed to be.
Okay.
And then all of that happened.
So where did that leave you?
Well, we're rebuilding the product ourselves internally again. So we're doing that in the UK and India at the moment.
So you have to basically start from scratch again, even though you had the technology, you originally had it built.
Yeah.
At least part of it, the MVP. So you're basically just starting from scratch.
Yeah. And so, look, we've got a great tech team now out of the UK. So we're building in India, but the design and the product and scoping is happening out of the UK. You know, one of our senior team members was a senior vice president of IBM and built an entire global market for IBM, and just exceptional.
So got great people involved.
And MiVote, as of very recently, literally in the last 3-4 months, has signed a contract with the PEG program. I don't know if you know the PEG program out of the UK.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and I'm really pushing hard for government members here in Australia to kind of replicate the project. It's a brilliant policy. So the PEG comes out of the Innovation Council of the UK, which sits inside the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet in the UK.
Okay.
And the PEG is a program that is effectively, the UK is looking to do two things. They look for global technologies that they think will A, build reputational value for the United Kingdom, and B, will be able to build economies and scale and jobs and so forth there in the UK. And so what they do is they say, look, if you're prepared to domicile, move your business to the UK, we'll give you a whole suite of incentives to do that. Okay. So some of it is priority on government contracts and government grants and access to philanthropists and venture capitalists, and so we signed that contract.
Innovation, right?
Yeah. And so we were the first, as far as I'm aware, we're the first not-for-profit to ever be accepted into the PEG. We signed that contract in December last year.
Nice.
We then set up a not-for-profit organisation, which is now done in the UK. We have a team of people there, and they are rebuilding the product right now under the PEG program.
Oh, so you're basically starting all over again from a developer perspective. Okay.
Yeah, we're starting all over again, but we know the parts of the technology that worked really well.
We take the learning, right?
Huge learnings from the experience, and we still have all of the market relationships at government level and others to make it work. There is, there's an ongoing debate, and I'm personally of the view that crypto is not necessary, that we shouldn't be tokenizing the vote. Others have a different perspective about that.
It's not necessary.
It's not necessary for what we want.
Yeah, from what you're doing, it just looking.
We need the blockchain, but I don't think we need the tokenization.
I understand that.
And I understand the secondary market value of being able to have a tradable piece within the organisation, but it's not core business for us. And so it made sense for Horizon, but it doesn't really make sense for MiVote. Yeah,
in terms of tokenising it, it's about creating value in it. It's about growing the value of that, and that's the more votes you have, obviously, on your ecosystem, the more value that token's going to be worth. But is that what you're looking for?
That's not the purpose, right? No, not at all. Because the value isn't what we're doing. We're a not-for-profit organisation.
Exactly.
So from our point of view, what we just need is an auditable, anonymous voting platform, which blockchain provides.
It does, yeah.
And then the interesting questions now, which were not questions at the time because they weren't technologically available, is whether it's an open source blockchain or it's a private blockchain, or so they're the
so many different options now. So in terms of private blockchain, could be okay if you've got enough sources actually running transactions. So then if you distribute it enough, you're okay. If you've got one, then it's not. It's just more of a database, and it's the same.
That's exactly right. So these are the kind of conversations that are taking place now.
Understand that. So it's obviously shifted completely in terms of where it sort of started from. So the learning from that, obviously, clearly the process didn't work. What do you think that's because you let go of control from the organisation, or do you think you had the wrong people involved in that organisation?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's a little of column A and a little of column B. So there were more learnings than just those. So I think the first thing is we let go of too much control, and not control for the sake of control, but control to ensure that we could have people deliver on their promises. So I'm less concerned about having a say on their board than I was about making sure my product got delivered.
Yeah, correct.
That's what I was worried about, right? And I had no recourse because I'm not a paying customer. I don't sit on their board, and I was still speaking to the CEO every day. It made no frigging difference at all. So that's part of the problem, right? So that control was an issue. I think we made an error in having a non-MiVote person head up the organisation, and when we were distributing those roles, we could have distributed them in a slightly different way. And I think, for example, had Jamie been the CEO, I don't think what happened with Horizon to MiVote would have happened.
Yeah, okay.
And so that was a huge learning for us.
So was Jamie moved over to Horizon State?
So Jamie moved over as one of the co-founders, but he was the head of product.
Okay, so he headed up the product, but didn't have the final call of making the decisions.
Not on the business decisions, not on the banking decisions, or on the payment decisions. And that again, we couldn't even intervene on that because we had no say in their business. They're a private business, right? So that was an issue. And the other thing is, I think to Jamie's credit, that business wouldn't have been as successful as it was for the short period it was successful, when it was worth $285 million at one point, if it wasn't for Jamie. I mean, Jamie is the most amazing digital evangelist, I reckon, in this country, almost.
Yeah, he's actually... He's quite pivotal in terms of blockchain in Australia, and was on every stage talking about blockchain across the world for that period of time, and getting to meet him, know him, and understand what he's all about.
He was like, it was guru status for a period of time.
It was, right?
And the only person who I think comes close to him in the blockchain space now in Australia is Steve Vallis at Blockchain APAC, who's another really good mate of mine. But when you look at what he did, I think that was significant. So the first learning is the control piece. The second learning is then the assignment of the roles and understanding what mattered to us as opposed to what mattered from a commercial sense for that business to be successful. The next thing I think was, and this is a big learning for me, is about where you make promises and how you make promises and the level of assurance you get before promises are made publicly. That's been a huge learning for me. And another one, I think, is being able to delineate between MVP, not even MVP, it's more about base level product at market, as opposed to when and where you need to invest in the bells and whistles, and what kind of triggers need to be met before you start working on V2, before you've appropriately validated V1. And then there are others around, specifically who we chose.
Understand that. So interesting how, like in the startup space and when we're building technology, we can get led by opportunity. I think this may have played out a little bit here. So it's clear an opportunity came to your door from a corporate perspective and it was something you couldn't deal with. But sometimes I think being true to who we are can actually...
Had we just said, no, we're not interested, none of it would have happened. 100%.
Yeah, and you might have been in a very different position from my vote perspective.
We would.
But in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing. But I think when we look at opportunity, we just need to assess we're not cutting ourselves off from where we're basically... And so, the vision was, what direction we're going.
And so Hamish, my co-founder, the way he describes this, which I think is an appropriate way to describe it, is that we were... we were too pure. We were trying to be too pure. So we saw this opportunity externally from the corporate market, and we were going, wow, that's a way to potentially fund the not-for-profit, but we can't do it. So let's spin it out, keep it completely arm's length so nobody could say that the corporate dollar was affecting the way that we were running the democratic platform. But at the same time, hope that the people that we're going to put in that place would actually do what they're promising us. And so we were trying to be too good and too smart about the way that we did it. And in doing it, none of it worked.
All right, so blew up in your face.
And to your point, we either could have said, no, we're not interested in the corporate dollar, thanks, but no thanks. Somebody will copy us and use their product. Or we could have said, we're going to spin it out, but we're going to retain a seat on the board to make sure that we get delivered what we want delivered. There were lots of different ways we could have gone, but we didn't go any of those ways.
Or we could have just soloed them off, had two versions running, built in MiVote and in... And that could have been an option too, and in Horizon State.
Well, look, the other thing is, and this was kind of at the point when the price went, I mean, they listed at 15 cents and they got to $6.95.
It blew up, didn't it?
Right? At the point that it was worth 250 plus million US dollars, we were literally begging their CEO to just sell $50 million worth of coin. And saying, build yourself a runway, build us a runway so we know, because you then give us our percentage donated as per the agreement. And we knew that we had 3 or 4 years that we could run really hard in the government space.
A beautiful move at that time.
And nobody would have everybody would have gone, well, that's why you set this up.
Yeah.
That's the purpose. But he just refused to do it.
Okay.
And the result of that was we watched it go from $6.95 back to 12 cents.
Yes.
And, game over at that point. So, and that's, it's been an interesting thing. But for us, even in the rebuild now in the UK and India, which are our two biggest markets by far, the other thing that's kind of an advantage for us is that the market has the democratic market has shifted. So Donald Trump is the greatest gift to MiVote that's ever happened, because he is literally the symbol of everything we have been warning against. Attacking the media, attacking the judiciary, not having people make decisions based on fact. He's everything that is wrong with the system, right? And so conversations that we used to have in America, conversations I used to have with political parties here in Australia, where they go, like it sounds like it's a problem, but it's not really a problem. All of those people are now going, it's a problem. Oh, let's talk. How can we get involved? Because we really need to do something now.
Yeah, so there's more awareness now. So it's a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
So in terms of that, so now you've come all this way. How many years have you been working on MiVote? Since 2006, 7 was it conceptualized?
A long time.
Yeah, a long time. So in terms of where it is now, do you believe that? Obviously, you had the tech problems, which I didn't really know about this, and I'm not sure how many people know about.
Nobody really.
Nobody knows. So it's interesting to actually talk about how it all played out from the outside looking in. Just looking in, I assumed MiVote just turned into Horizon State because so you could commercialise it.
Yeah.
Had no real context of what was going on. Now, in terms of all this sort of stuff was happening, you sort of went along from the technology play. Horizon State sort of blew up and then came back to Earth. That's no longer exists anymore. I know that someone else has taken over it from what I've seen.
Yeah, so that's a whole other conversation as well.
We won't dig into that. It's probably not too important.
Yeah, look, there are a group of original coin holders who have bought that IP.
Okay.
I think they're intending to commercialise it under a new name as it was, effectively the same business proposition.
Yeah.
Interestingly, a number of those people were, super MiVote supporters. Not one has reached out to do a deal with us and say, we want you back in the fold, or we want you to use the platform.
Interesting.
And as a result, we're building our own platform. We won't be using Horizon State or whatever V2 is of what they build. They can build for their market to make money. We're building to solve democracy.
Yeah, and that's a great place to stand, at least. And now you own the technology again.
Yep.
About to control the direction of it. So, and if you've had... I think one of the things that this conversation leans towards, if you've created a big vision and you've brought on so many people along the journey, and you've a good quality of people, and Jamie, for example, philanthropists coming on board, donating to an organisation and wanting to see the vision roll out, I think it's quite a powerful position to be in. And still, given what has happened in the past, you're still in a position of, we're still moving forward, we're still able to build this thing, and we're still pushing to make change. And I think it's quite a powerful place to be.
I think that's right. There is one final additional element, which again was part of the learning from everything that's happened. So if you look around the ecosystem, there are lots of really interesting technological interventions to DemTech and GovTech.
Yep.
They all take a slightly different approach. They all, some will have technology first approach, some will have ecosystem design approach. But they all have different interventions. And one of the things for me that's been a pivotal shift in my thinking, where for so many years my priority was about promoting a very specific single model that I was largely responsible for designing. Not completely, but largely responsible for designing. And that we were, I was the entrepreneur, I was the founder, and so I was pitching my business effectively, even though it was not for profit.
Understand.
I've kind of shifted somewhat philosophically on this now, and I am more interested in the entire ecosystem moving forward together as a unified approach to solving this problem than any one particular brand being the, inverted commas, winner.
Yes.
And so one of the things I'm working on at the university, in fact, it's kind of my major project at the moment. I suspect it'll take me 12 to 18 months to build, but I'm getting incredible traction at the moment, including very high-profile universities overseas and governments and stuff, is to actually build a research centre of excellence, a research institute, specifically for digital governance and leadership.
Okay.
So that actually all of the different players in this space, and that MiVote will not be welcome in that group, unless it pays its way like everybody else. But the intent is that the ecosystem has a single credible destination that we can explore and research ways that technology can enhance government decision making, participatory democracy, participatory budgeting, exposure of truth and data to the public. So there are like 40 different research areas that we can really drill down to and provide a place where all of us in this environment can work to the same outcome and help each other rather than compete with each other. And I think until we get to that point where the rising tide lifts all boats, we're not going to get anywhere, because it's such a big challenge to move these ecosystems and to have governments make structural pivots that mean they have less power than they once did, that there's no one group who's going to be able to do it on their own. That's kind of been the big realization for me.
Okay, so you're in a position where you've come to the understanding that MiVote may not be able to deliver this impact that you're looking for.
I think it can in some places, but it won't have the mass change.
So your now objective is to bring together universities across the globe?
No, not universities across the globe. So our university, with one or two other university partners, will build a research institute that enables technologists and innovators, governments, researchers to come together to fix these problems collectively. And to test each other's ideas. And so one group out of Brazil might say, look, we're doing it this way, and then we can look at some of their technology and go, we could put that in over here, and have you considered doing this, because over there they're doing it this way, and actually sharing this stuff in a single destination that is credible, that is researched properly and validated properly, so that when we go to governments and say, here's a way to do it, it's not just technologists and startup founders. It's actually, we've had this validated by the best researchers in the world in this space, and this is how it needs to be rolled out, and this is how you're going to defray these risks.
So, from where I'm stepping back, you're still on the vision of solving democracy and how we actually structure it, and the learning through this is MiVote came about, and it still will operate and run and try and make an impact. Turned into Horizon State, which sort of shifted that, now coming to a research centre in a different way to solve that problem. So you're on a journey of actually solving the same problem still.
And Hamish and I said, many years ago, we said this was a marathon, it's not a sprint. No, and look, this could be a 50-year exercise, right? But we believe, and many of the people who are with us believe, and now universities that I'm talking to around the world and governments believe that this is a critical need. It is. There has never been a greater need for this kind of intervention. Technology now provides a vehicle to do it well. What we need is credible testing to make sure that all of the non-expected ramifications of these interventions are better understood. So we understand the downflow risks of doing these interventions. But yeah, I mean, we'll just keep going until we fix it. So.
I love it. So in terms of to give some, obviously this conversation is really top level, but also so much detail around the complexities of what a startup can be and someone trying to make such a big impact. So this conversation might not be for everybody, but if you're out there looking to make a big shift and a pivotal impact on an ecosystem, on an economy at scale, what do you recommend to people out there that are looking to make these big shifts in such structured formations that it's so difficult to get into? What do you do? Where do you start? What do you do? How have you gone about this?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think it's different to any startup in as much as you have to be able to early define what success looks like.
Yes.
And so, over the next 6 months, what does a win look like?
Yep.
Well, it might just be, building the basic architecture. And then in a year, what does success look like? It might be that front end is done and you have user testing going. And so, particularly when you're looking for large scale change, you need to be able to map the milestones, because if all you're doing is measuring yourself against changing the world, you're on a hiding to nothing, right? 99.9% of people are going to drop out before they get to that point, if they ever reach that point.
Yep.
It really is about mapping milestones and finding wins. It's about celebrating the successes when they happen, but being clear that there is a bigger objective that we're all working towards. One of the lessons for us as we've discussed, is knowing when to say no and knowing how not to get distracted by shiny objects that come into view. And then, the other thing I think is about, from a technical perspective, it's that thing where you don't try and do too much right now. It's better to get it in market and validate and have people want to use it and iterate from there than try and build the perfect product and then launch it, and that takes you 3 years, and in fact it costs more money than you think, and technology changes from the time that you started it, and so you've now got to rework what you can and can't do, and the price of coin has changed and all that kind of stuff. So just, it's more about doing than it is about the vision stuff, but pinning yourself to a final successful vision. The other thing, and this is a non-technical question, or non-technical answer, but I think it's highly relevant for tech businesses, is you have to understand, this would be advice to any founder, you have to understand where within your ecosystem peripheral allies exist.
Okay.
And so it might be that they're not direct customers, or it might be, they're not direct technicians, but they are critical to the ecosystem in which you operate. And being able to find a relationship with those groups can usher you through and navigate complexities that as a small startup you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And so there may be no direct measurable benefit that you can go back to your board and say, well, we're partnering with X because of Y.
Yes.
But to understand the way the system actually works, as opposed to the way that it looks like it works, means that you understand that becomes an important relationship or an important pathway. In our space, that's critically important, because politics is so relationship based and so network based.
Yes.
To get into doors that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get into. I can tell you as an example, I met with one political leader whose own major donors were desperate for them not to meet me. Just desperate.
Didn't want.
But we found a pathway through a relationship that could make it happen independent of what those donors wanted. And so if you hadn't done the ecosystem mapping for a reasonable period of time to understand it, you wouldn't necessarily have been able to navigate that little piece. And so it's just constant learning and curiosity and asking questions and turning over rocks and all that kind of stuff.
So in terms of understanding that ecosystem, how did you go about that? Did you bring people that understood that into the organisation, or just reached out and asked a lot of questions?
Yeah. I mean, that's why it took so long in the front end. So, the years of research that we did was because we had literally thousands of conversations.
Understand.
So, and the next conversation gave you an insight that you didn't have before you walked into the room. And it contextualizes some of the conversations you've had before and helps frame questions for the ones you're going to have coming up.
It's all learning. It's all learning, evolving, gathering information, research, and treat it as research. Because I think people are fearful of getting out into the marketplace, but that's where you need to be, and asking questions of customers, even potential stakeholders.
You don't ship, you don't earn. So.
Yeah, exactly. So if you focus on just building a product and trying to get that out into the marketplace, it's a lot harder to sell a product to someone you've never spoken to and hasn't been involved in that process to begin with.
Yeah. And I think, I understand why, but I think for founders, and having been a founder 8 times, there is a fear in putting forward an idea that other people shoot down.
Yes.
But if the intent is to solve a problem as opposed to show how smart you are with your idea, and it helps you solve the problem better, then you should be embracing those conversations and saying, actually, I want you to pick this apart. So with MiVote, one of the things we did with the former Prime Minister of Australia was say to him, we want you to go to town on this. Try and break it. Ask any question you want about how it operates, because we want to make it the best it can possibly be. And we want to understand the bits that we don't currently understand, so that if we put it in the market, it's robust. The worst thing for us would have been to convince everybody that it works, put it in the market, have missed something, and it actually makes things worse, right? That was the thing we, particularly Hamish, was most scared of, right? That we would actually be a contributor to it getting worse. And so the way that you have to combat that is to literally pick it apart 360 degrees and go, Now, who can we talk to that understands that bit really well, or this bit under here, or that bit over that little ridge that we haven't really prosecuted yet? And how can we get in and speak to people who can go, listen, that's great, but you've totally missed that point. You don't understand how that bit works yet.
Yep.
Or, yeah, it's notionally right, but practically you don't understand how that gets delivered. And so that the way you're proposing it can't actually constitutionally happen. And so it's just to understand those bits become really important.
I think what you've sort of said there is to be the explorer, not to own an idea and then that's ours and we're putting it into a marketplace, but explore and I think you mentioned around the problem, and you put focus on problem, you'll very easily let go of your own ideas and allow the concept to evolve itself through the feedback loop, right? And if we can be open to feedback loop and not have to be able to let go of our baby. I think sometimes we can get a little bit stuck on the tech and what we're building. If we can just let go of that, throw that out the window, focusing on the problem and get people outside of our network to actually help build a product, you're on a better journey.
100%. And I think the reality of anything that gets built to scale, any kind of business that goes to scale, and I've founded 3 businesses that have been in the Fast 50, and I was the CEO of the fastest growing private company in the country in 2010 for under 100 million.
Yes.
And any business that grows quickly has to be, in essence, bigger than the individual leading it, right? That's particularly the case for a social impact business.
Yes.
So if you are not building for your own redundancy, there's no way you can scale. It has to be bulletproof beyond you. The idea has to be more solid. The product needs to be more solid. The market needs to be more solid. The audience and engagement and community needs to be more solid, because no one person can be the justification for an ecosystem existing. Right? Because we're only here for a short period of time. And so if it is predicated on you, then it'll never be long-term success. It'll never be sustainable.
I think what you sort of said around you're trying to impact social and make that, and that takes it off you because it's got nothing to do with you. And a philanthropist putting money in because he believes that something needs to change and gets involved in what you're trying to do there. Is testament to what you're putting out in the marketplace, because no one's going to buy in if you're just trying to be about you. And setting up a non-for-profit was a huge decision, and I imagine that was pretty much the only way it was going to be done. You couldn't have a corporate business trying to impact something like this scale.
Although there are a lot that have tried to do it in this space, and they fail miserably for that reason, because people go, well, who owns this and who's benefiting and why are you making that decision?
Exactly. We don't want people getting paid to basically shift the vote, and that could happen in some countries. We see it all the time in terms of how that sort of plays out in terms of there is no democracy in some countries.
There are even some tech interventions, some reasonably well-known ones here in Australia, who built blockchain-based policy voting platforms where people could sell their vote. I mean, how fucking undemocratic is that?
You can sell your vote.
You can actually... Now, that's brilliant. I mean, I mercilessly attacked them for that, and they've now changed their model. But even the idea of saying, I'm not an expert, so I'll sell my vote to an expert. Well, all you're doing is, you're creating a hyper environment, a hyper capitalized environment for the very same problem that we have now, which is that vested interest by policy outcome.
I think it'll make it worse.
It'll make it infinitely worse, right? And again, if you start from a technological capability perspective, then that becomes a possibility. If you start from a first principles approach perspective, which says, what is democracy meant to do? Then you could never propose that solution because it would not bring you closer to democracy.
Correct.
And so, again, like all these products, it's where is your starting point? What is your frame of reference? What problem are you trying to solve? And is the intervention genuinely solving that problem? Or is it just a display of your own technical proficiency? And they're the sort of ongoing questions.
I think it's really good feedback in terms of a different frame of how we might not approach technology first. Because in reality, we're building a business model or an ecosystem in your case, and the technology is just a means to an end. I think people get too caught up in it. We said it at the start of the conversation around we're building a shiny new product that people might buy, but if we focus on why they're going to buy it, what problem we're going to solve, and the business model around that, I think it's a little bit easier to make decisions around what your product should do rather than what you think it might do to make an impact on people buying it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a really old quote from I think the 50s or 60s that Alday Stevenson, American, said, an atom is neither good nor bad. The good and bad are in the souls of men, and that's what it is. I gave a speech in London in October last year at the World's Top 50 Innovators Conference about the ethics of capability. you know, and that just because we can build things doesn't mean we should build things. But if we are going to build things, what are the ethical questions we need to be asking ourselves at the front end about the ecosystem around the unintended consequences of our capability?
Interesting.
And so, you know, Facebook, when it came out, was this amazing opportunity for you to share and be in touch with. And nobody knew it would be a massive erosion point to democracy. Nobody expected that, right? Now, we can see this in hindsight, that that's what's happened. So when we're building things, what level of ethical consideration needs to be brought into the design phase and the architecture phase that says, hang on, let's extrapolate this out. And if this went as well as it could possibly go, what happens? What happens to the social structures, to communication, to people's safety, to privacy? Those are the questions if you're building for scale.
Yeah, in terms of building for scale, that's a whole strategic, up the front piece of work that has to happen, and it could take years to actually design that, depending on how complex your system is. And I imagine the level of complexity you've had through the journey of how many silos you're impacting. Because there's government, but there's all these other little bits of detail within that.
Absolutely.
Huge amount of complexity within that. So you need some really good people involved in that process. We might end this here, Adam. Just one last question. You've obviously had so much experience from the journey of entrepreneurial journeys throughout your time. What are some key learnings that you've taken through successes? Let's look at successes that you've had across those journeys to jump into early stage ecosystems. How do you position yourself? Because you seem to be positioning yourself up front on waves. How do you do that? And what do you think about when you're jumping into a new startup?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Look, I think there are just self-awareness is really important. In general. Know what you don't, know what you know, and be really upfront about what you don't know. And try and figure out the things that you don't know, how many of them really actually matter. And if they matter, then make it your business to learn about them is really important. I think it's critically important to let your values be sort of your business card, and that you have to lead ethically wherever you can. And that whatever you stand for is what people should reputationally hold you to. And so to me, that's really important because I work in the social space. For me, it's always start with the problem. And if you can't identify the, Einstein said it, if you can't say it simply, you don't understand it well enough, right? And I try and reinforce that with all of the startup founders that I work with. What's the problem you're solving? Why are you the right ones to solve it? Why is what you're offering unique in the market? Why should anybody want to buy it, right? And you have to be able to answer those things. So the what, the why, and the how. And then I think the other thing is that you need to be honest about why you're doing things. So I tend to be kind of a social innovation warrior, but for a lot of people that doesn't interest them, and that's fine. I have no issue with that. If you're there to make money, be very frank about that. We're here to make money. That's why we've structured the business the way that we have. That's why the business model is the way that it is. And just be upfront and authentic and genuine with people. I think whether it's community building or whether it's commercialization, the more people can trust that what they're hearing is the truth, the more cut through you will get in general, in every way. And so if it's unashamedly about making money, then let it be that. But at least people will know what they're getting into. And
you attract people of like mind.
Yeah, people just want authenticity most of the time.
Correct.
And then the other thing I think is really, it's really about the people that you surround yourself with. And so it's gap filling in some regards, but it's really about who is on this journey with you, not who wants a job, not who has technical expertise, but if you're a startup founder, who is on this journey, who actually believes in it as much as you believe in it. And yes, you might be rewarded slightly better than they are, or maybe not, depending upon how you structure your business. But those people are worth their weight in gold, because when it gets hard, and it invariably will get hard, they're the people who are going to stick with you and work, no matter what. And that's a huge lesson for me through MiVote, that, I had a number of startups and we used to pay people really well, but they were 9-to-5 people and they were very good at what they did, but it was a job.
Understand.
And then I went into MiVote and I had people who were paid nothing and they worked harder than anybody I'd ever met in my life. And you'd be going, this is so counterintuitive that I'm not paying them anything and I've never been able to rely on people more.
Interesting.
But it's because they were on the journey. They believed in it as much as Hamish and I believed in it.
How did you attract those people?
Look, I think it comes down to, it wasn't about us. I think it's about the vision. It's about people going, like that guy who sent us that first $40,000 check.
Yeah.
That's the vision of the future that I want to live in.
Get it.
It has nothing to do with you. I mean, and it might have been that we got to a point where we had hundreds of volunteers and they said, actually, you and Hamish are shithouse. You're not the right people to make that vision happen. We're going to boot you out the side door.
Yes.
And honestly, Hamish and I would have gone, if it means that the thing's going to work, we would have just walked out the front door. That's how much we believe in the vision, right? And so it's about presenting an alternative future, an alternative solution to the problem.
Yes.
And people going, that's the way to go.
Yeah.
I'm fully in on that.
We might leave it there, Adam. I think today you shared some interesting insights with people that are pretty much founders of businesses, and the objective of this podcast is to help non-techs really get clarity on, you're probably focusing in the right area. Don't shift your focus just to the technology, and don't bring on, I think one of the last things you said was people that are just there because they're technically sound, but people that are going to buy into your vision, what your future looks like, and want to be a part of that journey. So, Adam, how can people reach out, get in touch with you? I know
Twitter's the best way, as long as you can stand my usual political rants. So that's Adam A. Jacoby. That's my Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn, also Adam A. Jacoby. Or you can, do your very best to navigate your way through the Swinburne Rolodexes and find me there.
You've got an accelerator and stuff there. Can you tell people about that?
We've got a pre-accelerator. We've got it is just because of coronavirus. So everything's kind of at the university on hold at the moment.
I understand,
but yes, we have an accelerator that would ordinarily be starting next month in May. We've done a deal with United Nations Australia. I can't talk about the full nature, but we'll be running other accelerators with them. So pre-accelerators, accelerators, masterclasses, lots of opportunity to work with startup mentors, business leaders. So if you want to reach out to the Swinburne Innovation Precinct, by all means, look for me there. You can always find me if you wander the halls of that building. I'll be around.
No, perfect, Adam. I appreciate you coming in today and just sharing your journey, what it's been like over the course of You've been an entrepreneur for many years now in terms of 9 startups it's been. So, it's really good to hear from people that have done this over and over again. Some successful, some still working towards success, but I think one of the key takeaways for me is persistence. And if you believe enough in that vision, you'll persist no matter what the outcome looks like or no matter what direction you're going to take. So thanks for sharing it.
Well, thanks for having me.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Thanks.